The air on Kethara Prime didn't just have weight, it had texture. It was a soupy, chlorophyllic broth that clung to the skin, beaded on exposed metal, and carried the sense of a billion years of evolution that had taken a path wildly divergent from Earth's. Dr. Elena Vasquez breathed it in, not with the filtered reluctance of her colleagues, but with a connoisseur's appreciation. She could parse the individual notes, the sweet, cloying perfume of the gossamer orchid, the sharp tang of copper-rich soil, and the low, musky hum of unseen life that permeated everything. This was her cathedral, and she was here to worship at the altar of its biodiversity. Her fingers, stained green from the samples in her collection case, gently brushed the frond of a heliotropic fern. It shivered, its iridescent surface rippling with colors that followed the motion of her hand, a silent, shimmering conversation. Around her, the jungle was a symphony of controlled chaos. Towering cyan-barked trees, their canopies so dense they created a perpetual twilight on the forest floor, were draped in phosphorescent moss that pulsed with a soft, internal light. The ground, a spongy carpet of decaying organic matter, squelched softly under her reinforced boots. Every shadow could hide a predator. Every beautiful flower could be a lure for a carnivore. This was the fundamental truth of Kethara Prime, a truth the Terran colonial authority on the orbital station, Kethara Spire, translated into one simple, overriding directive: fear. Elena translated it as respect. A flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, a disruption in the steady, rhythmic pulse of the glowing fungi, brought her head up. Her hand instinctively hovered over the sonic deterrent on her belt, but she didn't draw it. The movement was low to the ground, furtive. A moment later, a scavenger skitter broke from the undergrowth. It was a creature of brutal efficiency, about the size of a large dog, with 6 chitinous legs, a pair of serrated mandibles that clicked restlessly, and 2 sets of eyes that glowed with a predatory red light. It had likely smelled the nutrient paste bar she'd eaten an hour ago. Most colonists would have blasted it without a second thought. The manual dictated an engagement distance of 50 meters. This one was barely 10. Elena remained perfectly still. She didn't tense up. She relaxed, letting her posture broadcast a calm, non-threatening presence. She met the creature's upper set of eyes, the ones used for assessing threats. She didn't glare. She simply looked, an open, steady gaze that conveyed a simple message: I am here. I see you. This is my space for now. The skitter's mandibles clicked faster, a sign of agitation. It took a hesitant step forward, its segmented body low to the ground. It was testing her. Elena didn't move a muscle. She slowed her breathing, mimicking the gentle rise and fall of the massive puffball spores nearby. The jungle had a rhythm, and the key to survival was to become part of it, not to fight against it. The creature watched her for a full minute, its alien mind processing the utter lack of fear in this soft-skinned biped. Fear was food. Fear was a trigger. The absence of it was a puzzle. Finally, with a low chitter of what Elena interpreted as frustrated confusion, the skitter backed away, melting back into the shadows as silently as it had appeared. Elena let out a slow breath, a small smile touching her lips. She made a note on her datapad. Skitter response to non-aggressive posturing remains consistent. Curiosity overrides immediate predatory instinct when fear stimulus is absent. It was another small piece of a grand, beautiful puzzle she was dedicating her life to solving. The comm unit on her wrist chimed, shattering the tranquility. Vasquez, are you reading me? Your biometrics just spiked. The voice was Dr. Ben Carter's, laced with its usual brand of anxious paternalism. He was a geologist, a man who understood the world through seismic data and rock strata. The unpredictable, fluid nature of biology made him profoundly uncomfortable. I'm fine, Ben, she replied, her voice a low murmur. Just a close encounter of the 6-legged kind, all sorted. Sorted. Elena, the protocol is clear. You see a Class 3 predator, you deploy the deterrent and fall back. You are supposed to stay within the perimeter of Sensor Beacon 4. The heliotropic ferns I'm studying don't care about our sensor beacons, Ben. And if I used the deterrent every time something with teeth looked at me, I'd never get any work done. Besides, it was just a skitter. A sigh crackled through the comm. There's no such thing as just a skitter. Last year, one of them tore the arm off a security officer. An officer in full armor. The officer panicked and tried to run. Elena countered, her patience fraying. He acted like prey, I didn't. She clipped her sample case to her belt and began the trek back toward the beacon. The argument was as old as their friendship. Ben saw the jungle as a collection of threats to be neutralized. Elena saw it as a complex society to be understood. It was a philosophical divide that defined their life at Outpost Xylos. The outpost was a small, beleaguered bubble of human civilization, carved into the edge of a massive, continent-spanning jungle. Prefabricated modules connected by pressurized walkways formed a rough hexagon around a central landing pad. A high-energy fence, humming with a lethal charge, provided a perimeter that was more psychological comfort than practical defense. Anything big enough to be a real threat could likely get over it or through it. The 100 or so scientists, technicians, and support staff who lived there existed in a state of perpetual, low-grade siege. Back in the relative sterility of the botany lab, the jungle's cacophony was replaced by the hum of air purifiers and the gentle whir of analytic machinery. Ben was waiting for her, his arms crossed over his chest, his brow furrowed. "You were gone for 4 hours," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "Your transponder went dark for 12 minutes. Battery flicker." "It's logged," Elena said, carefully placing her samples into a sterile containment unit. "Look at this, Ben." She pointed to a fern frond now shimmering under the lab's artificial lights. "The chromatophores are reacting to the full spectrum of the lamp, not just the dominant wavelength. They're not just photosensitive, they're photoadaptive on a cellular level. Imagine the applications. Self-adjusting camouflage, data storage in organic mediums." Ben glanced at the sample, but his eyes were on her. "I'm glad you're excited, Elena. I really am. But your methods are going to get you killed. And if you get killed, Governor Cromwell will have all the ammunition he needs to shut us down for good." The name hung in the air like a bad smell. Governor Thane Cromwell was the embodiment of the Terran colonial authorities' risk-averse, bottom-line-obsessed mentality. He administered the Kethara system from the sterile, zero-gravity environment of the Spire, an orbital station that looked down on the planet with what Elena always felt was a mixture of contempt and fear. He had never set foot on the surface. To him, Kethara Prime wasn't a world of breathtaking discovery. It was a liability, a budget item that constantly threatened to go into the red with insurance claims and funeral expenses. "Cromwell doesn't understand this place," Elena said, her voice tight. "He sees a monster in every shadow because he's never taken the time to see what's actually casting it." "He sees the casualty reports," Ben retorted. "And he's not wrong. This world is dangerous, more than dangerous. It's actively hostile. We have protocols for a reason. They keep us alive." "They keep us in a cage," Elena shot back, her gaze sweeping around the sterile white walls of the lab. "We're not here to hide, Ben. We're here to learn. And you can't learn about a jungle from inside a box." Their argument was interrupted by the chime of the lab's primary communication terminal, an official summons. As if summoned by their conversation, the face of Governor Cromwell appeared on the screen. It was a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and then left out in the rain for a century. Thin lips, eyes the color of a winter sky, and a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. "Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Carter," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I have just reviewed the incident report from Outpost Xylos Security concerning your unsanctioned solo excursion, Dr. Vasquez." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "It was a routine sample collection, Governor." "Routine?" Cromwell's eyebrow arched, a minuscule movement that conveyed immense disapproval. "Encountering a Class 3 predator at close range without deploying countermeasures is anything but routine. It is a reckless breach of safety protocols. This isn't some colonial park, Doctor. This is a death world." "With all due respect, Governor," Elena said, choosing her words carefully, "my methods are effective. The creature withdrew without any escalation." "You were lucky," Cromwell snapped. "The authority does not build policy on luck. You are a botanist, one of the best we have, according to your file. But you are not an animal behaviorist, and you are certainly not a security officer. Your primary objective is to find xenobotanicals with commercial or medical applications. Specifically, you are to be focusing on the so-called sun-eater orchid, which preliminary long-range scans suggest might have incredible energy-storing properties. Find it, sample it, and do it within the established safety parameters. Am I clear? The orchid only grows in the deep jungle, Elena stated calmly, far beyond the current sensor perimeter. Then submit a formal request for a perimeter expansion, complete with a full risk assessment matrix and resource allocation proposal. Follow the procedure, Cromwell said dismissively. But the days of scientists wandering off into the wilderness like it's a nature hike are over. This project is already over budget, and the last thing I need is to explain to the board why we have to ship one of our top researchers home in a body bag. Confine your activities to the established safe zones. Cromwell out. The screen went blank, leaving Elena and Ben in a tense silence. He's right, you know, Ben said softly. About the procedure. Elena turned away from the dead screen, her eyes burning with a frustration that went deeper than a simple disagreement with a superior. It was a fundamental clash of worldviews. Procedure, she scoffed. Procedure is what you use when you're afraid, when you don't understand. He wants me to file paperwork about a world he refuses to set foot on. He wants a risk assessment for a place where risk is like the air we breathe. It's not about safety, Ben. It's about control. He wants to tame this world with regulations and fences, but Kethara doesn't work that way. She looked back at her samples, at the captured, shimmering piece of an ecosystem so vast and complex it made their entire human endeavor seem like a child's sandcastle on the edge of a raging sea. You can't tame Kethara, she murmured, more to herself than to Ben. You have to listen to it. A few weeks later, a compromise was reached, brokered by the outpost's long-suffering commander, a man who had the unenviable job of mediating between Cromwell's edicts and his scientists' ambitions. Elena would be allowed to lead a small, four-person expedition into the sector, where long-range scans had indicated the highest probability of finding the sun-eater orchid. The catch was that it would be a heavily armed and rigidly controlled affair. 2 security officers would accompany her and Ben, and they were under strict orders to maintain a defensive posture at all times. The expedition felt wrong from the start. The rhythmic, almost meditative process of her solo treks was replaced by the constant, nervous chatter of the security team and the electronic whine of their gear. They moved through the jungle not as observers, but as invaders. Their heavy footsteps crushed delicate flora. Their sonic perimeter fence created a dead zone of unnatural silence around them, and their pulse rifles were always raised, sweeping the shadows for threats. They were in a region of the jungle characterized by colossal, stone-like fungi that jutted from the earth like monolithic tombstones. The air was thick with their spores, which caught the filtered light in glittering, golden clouds. It was beautiful, but the security officers, encased in their environmental suits, saw only a potential respiratory hazard. Suddenly, a high-pitched shriek echoed through the petrified forest. It was a sound that grated on the human nervous system, a serrated edge of pure aggression. From behind the stone-like fungi, a pack of creatures emerged. They were bipedal reptilian hunters, about the height of a man, with lean, muscular bodies, sickle-shaped claws on their inner toes, and heads that swiveled with a bird-like quickness. Shriekers, they were pack hunters, intelligent and brutally effective. "Hostiles! Formation Delta!" one of the officers yelled, his voice tinny over the comms. The 2 guards immediately formed a back-to-back position, rifles up, targeting lasers painting red dots on the lead animals. Ben scrambled behind them, fumbling for his own sidearm. The shriekers fanned out, their movements coordinated. They weren't charging blindly. They were testing the perimeter, looking for a weak point. Their shrieks became a complex series of calls and responses, a tactical language Elena could almost understand. "Don't fire," Elena said, her voice sharp and commanding. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that is a direct contradiction of engagement protocol," the lead officer shot back, not taking his eyes off the circling predators. "They're not attacking. They're defending," Elena insisted, her eyes scanning the area. She noticed it then, a series of deep scratches in the soft bark of a nearby tree and a pile of gnawed alien bones. "This is their territory, a feeding ground. We blundered into their dinner table. The sonic fence is just agitating them." "What's your recommendation, Doctor?" the officer asked, his voice tight with skepticism. "Turn off the fence, lower your weapons, and back away." Slowly. "That's insane," Ben hissed from behind the guards. "They'll tear us apart." "Trust me," Elena said, her gaze fixed on the alpha of the pack. It was slightly larger than the others, with a series of dark stripes along its back. She met its cold, reptilian stare. Just as she had with the skitter, she projected calm, she projected respect. She took a deliberate step backward, then another, her movements slow and non-threatening. The officer hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gave a curt nod to his partner. "Kill the fence, on the doctor's authority." The low hum of the perimeter barrier died. The oppressive, unnatural silence it created was instantly filled with the ambient noise of the jungle. The shriekers paused, their heads cocked. The aggression in their shrieks subsided slightly, replaced by a note of confusion. "Now back up," Elena commanded softly. "No sudden moves." The four humans began to retreat, step by painstaking step. The shriekers watched them, their sickle claws tapping nervously on the ground, but they didn't advance. They held their ground, a line of silent, scaly sentinels guarding their territory. After 100 meters of agonizingly slow retreat, the pack seemed to lose interest, turning their attention back to the carcass. Once they were a safe distance away, the lead officer finally lowered his rifle, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow. "I don't believe that just worked," he breathed. Ben leaned against a tree, his face pale. "We could have all been killed. Or we could have started a firefight, killed half the pack, and had the rest of them hunt us all the way back to the outpost," Elena countered, her adrenaline finally starting to ebb. "Sometimes the best weapon isn't a pulse rifle, it's understanding." But as she looked at the faces of her companions, she saw no appreciation for her insight. She saw fear. They weren't impressed by her connection to this world. They were terrified of it. To them, she hadn't prevented a disaster. She had just proven how dangerously unpredictable she was, how willing she was to gamble with their lives on a feeling. The incident report would paint her as a reckless eccentric, and she knew it would get back to Cromwell. Her leash was about to get a whole lot shorter. The Sun-Eater orchid and the true secrets of Kethara Prime felt farther away than ever. The fallout from the Shrieker incident was exactly what Elena had predicted. Governor Cromwell, upon receiving the report, issued a new, even more restrictive directive. All expeditions were now limited to a 10-kilometer radius from the outpost, and Elena was explicitly forbidden from a field leadership role. She was, in effect, grounded. Her official status was consultant, a title that tasted like ash in her mouth. She was to analyze data from probes and assist other teams with their research, all from the sterile confines of her lab. For weeks, she chafed under the restrictions. She watched other teams go out, clad in what she considered to be laughably excessive armor, armed with enough firepower to level a city block, and they came back with meager, contaminated samples and incomplete data. They were treating the jungle like an enemy combatant, and the jungle was responding in kind. They were blind to its subtleties, deaf to its rhythms. They were trying to conquer it, and Kethara was a world that refused to be conquered. Ben, racked with a mixture of guilt and relief, tried to placate her. "It's for the best, Elena, at least for a while. Let things cool down. We can still make progress with drone surveys." "A drone can't smell the air after a sporefall, Ben," she argued, pacing the length of her small lab like a caged animal. "It can't feel the change in barometric pressure that signals a coming bloom. It can't look a predator in the eye and tell it to back off. We're collecting data points, not knowledge." Her frustration was building into a quiet, simmering obsession. The Sun-Eater orchid became more than a scientific objective. It was a symbol of everything Cromwell was trying to suppress. It represented the wild, untamable heart of Kethara, and she felt a desperate, almost spiritual need to find it. She spent her nights poring over the drone footage, cross-referencing it with geological surveys and atmospheric data. The orchid, she theorized, would grow in a very specific environment. A deep, narrow canyon with high concentrations of rare earth metals in the soil and a unique atmospheric composition, a place where the planet's magnetic field was unusually strong. She found it, a thin, jagged scar in the landscape, 30 kilometers to the northwest, far outside the mandated zone. The drones couldn't get a clear reading of the canyon floor due to magnetic interference, but the spectral analysis of the vegetation on the canyon rim was a near-perfect match for her projections. It had to be there. She went to the outpost commander with her findings, presenting a calm, logical case for a two-person expedition. It was denied before she could even finish her presentation. "My hands are tied, doctor. Cromwell's orders are absolute." That night, she couldn't sleep. The hum of the outpost's life support felt like a prison's drone. She looked out the reinforced plasteel window of her quarters at the jungle, a vast, dark sea under the light of Kethara's 3 moons. It was calling to her. She knew Ben would try to stop her, so she didn't tell him. She left a note on his desk, a simple, "Found a promising site. Back soon," which she knew was a woefully inadequate explanation. She disabled the internal tracking on her comm unit, a trick she'd learned from a disgruntled technician, and slipped out of the outpost using a maintenance airlock she knew was a blind spot in the security grid. For the first time in weeks, as she stepped into the humid, vibrant darkness of the jungle, she felt like she could breathe again. The journey was arduous. She moved with a speed and confidence that would have been impossible for the armored security teams, her senses on high alert. She was not an intruder here. She was a visitor, and she moved with the respect that entailed. She skirted the territories of the larger nocturnal predators, read the signs in the bent twigs and disturbed earth, and became just another shadow in a world of shadows. After nearly 6 hours of hard trekking, she reached the canyon's edge. It was a breathtaking sight. The chasm plunged into the planet's crust, and from its depths rose a faint, ethereal glow. The magnetic interference was palpable, making her compass spin uselessly and the display on her datapad flicker. She found a natural, if treacherous, path down the steep rock face and began her descent. The air grew warmer as she descended, and the flora changed. The plants here were different, adapted to the unique energy fields of the canyon. They pulsed with a soft, internal light, their colors more vibrant, more saturated than anything she had seen on the surface. And then, on a wide ledge near the canyon floor, she saw it. The sun-eater orchid. It was more magnificent than the long-range scans had ever suggested. It wasn't a single flower, but a complex symbiotic colony that grew in a spiral, its petals, each the size of her hand, a dazzling, shifting kaleidoscope of indigo and violet. In its center was a crystalline structure that pulsed with captured energy, emitting the soft, hypnotic glow that filled the canyon. It was the biological equivalent of a cold fusion reactor. The implications were staggering. This plant could revolutionize energy technology for the entire Terran sphere. She approached it with a reverence usually reserved for ancient relics. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her sample kit and tricorder. She was completely absorbed, her entire world shrinking to this single, miraculous discovery. The tricorder whirred, its sensors struggling against the magnetic flux, but feeding her a stream of data that made her heart pound with excitement. The energy output was off the charts. The cellular structure was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. She was so focused, so utterly lost in the moment of scientific rapture, that she failed to notice the subtle shift in the environment. The constant hum of the jungle's smaller creatures had ceased. The air had become still, heavy, and charged with a primal electric tension. A deep, guttural silence had fallen over the canyon. Ben Carter awoke with a jolt. A feeling of profound unease had pulled him from a restless sleep. He checked his terminal, no messages from Elena. He walked to her lab, it was empty. Her quarters were also empty. Then he saw the note on his desk. His blood ran cold. Back soon. He knew exactly what she had done. Panic seized him. He ran to the command center, his mind racing. He knew he had to report her, but he also knew that would be the end of her career. And if she was in trouble, he pulled up her research logs, frantically searching for any clue. He found her recent analysis of the canyon site, her notes filled with excited speculation. 30 kilometers northwest. He grabbed a medical kit and a pulse rifle, his hands shaking. He didn't raise the alarm. Not yet. He told the gate guard he was running a diagnostic on the perimeter fence, using a maintenance code to override the lockdown. He was a terrible liar, but the guard was half asleep and just waved him through. He plunged into the jungle, following the faint signal of her suit's emergency beacon, which she had apparently forgotten or been unable to disable. He wasn't a field scientist like Elena, but he was driven by a desperate, terrifying fear for his friend. Back in the canyon, Elena was carefully snipping a small piece of the orchid's root system when she felt it. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a pressure change in the air behind her, a sudden drop in temperature, the instinctual prickle on the back of her neck that evolution had hardwired into the genes of every prey animal since the beginning of time. Her head snapped up. The world seemed to slow down, the vibrant colors of the canyon leaching away into a stark, monochrome tableau of threat and response. 30 meters away, on a rock outcropping slightly above her, stood the reason this canyon had remained untouched for so long. It was a glycan. The creature was a legend, an apex predator spoken of in hushed, fearful tones by the outpost staff. It was the ghost of the jungle, a phantom of tooth and claw that had only ever been glimpsed on grainy trail cameras or inferred from the massive, shredded carcasses it left in its wake. It was even larger than the stories claimed. 400 pounds of perfectly evolved killing machine. It had 6 limbs, the front 4 being powerful, muscle-ripped legs, the back 2 acting as balancers and stabilizers. Its fur was a masterpiece of natural camouflage, a shifting pattern of greens and grays that made it seem to dissolve into the background foliage. Its head was wide and flat, with 2 sets of ears and eyes that glowed with a chilling, phosphorescent green. A low growl, more a vibration in the chest than a sound, rumbled from its throat, and with a soft snick, a set of claws, each the size of a kitchen knife, extended from its massive paws. It had been stalking her. It had watched her descend, watched her work, waiting for the perfect moment of inattention, and now it had found it. Elena was trapped, her back to the orchid, the sheer canyon wall behind her. There was no escape. The glycan coiled its body, its powerful haunches bunching like massive springs. Its gaze was locked on her, an unblinking stare of absolute predatory intent. 30 meters. For the glycan, it was not a distance. It was an explosion. Ben scrambled down the last of the rock face, his lungs burning, his legs screaming in protest. He could see the glow from the canyon floor. He heard a low growl that made the fillings in his teeth ache. He rounded a rocky corner and his heart stopped. He saw Elena frozen, and he saw the glycan coiled, ready to strike. It was a scene from a nightmare. He raised his rifle, his hands slick with sweat, but he knew he was too far away. He'd never get a clear shot before it launched. He opened his mouth to scream her name, a useless, desperate sound. The scream died in his throat as the glycan sprang. It didn't run. It launched itself through the air, a 400-pound missile of fur and fury, covering the 30-meter distance in a single, breathtaking bound. The air ripped with its passage. To Ben, it was an inescapable, instantaneous blur of death. But Elena didn't see a blur. In the strange, timeless space that adrenaline had carved out for her, every detail was crystal clear. She saw the ripple of muscles under its camouflaged pelt, the way its ears flattened against its skull to reduce drag, the terrifying focus in its glowing green eyes. She saw the arc of its trajectory and the precise point where it would land, right on top of her. Fear was a useless emotion. Panic was a death sentence. Her mind, honed by 1,000 quiet observations and a lifetime of trying to understand the deep, silent language of the wild, went utterly silent. All that was left was instinct, a pure, clean, cold instinct that was older and deeper than conscious thought. She didn't dodge. She didn't run. She didn't even raise her hands to shield herself. As the glycan reached the apex of its pounce, its massive body blotting out the light from the canyon, its claws extended to rip and tear, Elena moved. It was not a step of retreat, but a single, perfectly timed step forward into the attack. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, a dancer's move of impossible grace. The creature's own immense momentum became her ally. As its huge head and shoulders descended, she didn't try to block it. She met it. Her right hand shot up, not in a fist, but with an open palm, fingers rigid. It was a movement of surgical precision. Her hand found its target in the thick, muscular column of the glycan's throat. Her fingers and thumb wrapped around its windpipe, her grip locking with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The force of the impact was titanic. It drove her back a step, her boots skidding on the rocky ground, her arms screaming in protest as every sinew and ligament was strained to its breaking point. But she held. The glycan's forward momentum was abruptly, shockingly arrested. It landed off balance, its front paws hitting the ground with a thud that shook the ledge, while its hindquarters were still in the air, its body twisted into an unnatural shape. It was suspended for a heartbeat in a state of utter confusion, caught mid-kill by an impossibility. And then the stare-down began. The glycan, enraged and bewildered, tried to bring its head down to bite, to snap the fragile arm that held it. But Elena's grip was like iron, positioned perfectly at the base of its jaw, preventing it from getting the leverage it needed. It let out a choked, furious roar, but the sound was strangled in its throat. It thrashed, its powerful legs kicking up rocks and soil, its claws gouging deep furrows in the ground just inches from her feet. But Elena didn't move. She just held on, her entire body a rigid anchor of defiance. She looked directly into its phosphorescent green eyes. And in that moment she was no longer Dr. Elena Vasquez, botanist. She was something else, something older. Her gaze was not one of fear or anger or even aggression. It was a look of absolute, unshakable, and ancient authority. It was a stare that bypassed the predator's rage and spoke directly to the primal brain beneath. It was the unwavering gaze of the true apex. It said, "I am not your prey. I am not a threat to be eliminated. I am the thing you should have been afraid of. I am the rock you cannot break. I am the end of your attack." The glycan's fury began to falter. The rage in its eyes gave way to confusion. This small, soft creature was not fighting back. It was not screaming. It was simply holding, denying it. This went against every instinct, every rule of life and death the glycan had ever known. Its struggles lessened. The thrashing subsided. Its glowing eyes, locked with hers, began to show the first flicker of a new emotion: doubt. Elena pressed her advantage, not with strength but with will. She poured every ounce of her focus, her concentration, her very essence into that stare. She held the creature's gaze, stripping away its predatory certainty layer by layer. She could feel the frantic, hammering pulse of the artery under her thumb, a drumbeat of wild panic. The great predator's breath came in ragged, strangled gasps. The doubt in its eyes bloomed into fear. The mighty glycan, the ghost of the jungle, the undisputed king of this canyon, was terrified. A low sound escaped its throat, a sound it had likely never made in its adult life. It was a soft, pitiful whimper. Its body went limp. The fight was gone. It had submitted. Slowly, deliberately, Elena relaxed her grip. She didn't snatch her hand away. She slid it up from the creature's throat, along its jawline, to the spot just behind its ear. The glycan flinched but didn't move. And then, in a gesture of almost casual intimacy, she gave its head two gentle, reassuring pats. It was the gesture of a master to a chastened hound. A final, undeniable assertion of dominance. She took a step back. The glycan lay on the ground for a moment, its massive chest heaving. Then, with a slow, almost drunken movement, it scrambled to its feet. It looked at Elena, its green eyes wide with a bewildered terror. It took a hesitant step backward, then another. Then, with its tail tucked between its hind legs, the 400-pound apex predator turned and fled, crashing into the undergrowth and disappearing into the canyon's glowing shadows. Silence descended once more, broken only by the sound of Elena's own ragged breathing. The adrenaline began to recede, and a violent tremor ran through her entire body. She looked down at her right hand. It was red and raw but unbroken. It seemed like a foreign object, a thing that belonged to someone else. Then she heard a sound from above, the clatter of a dropped object. She looked up. Ben was standing there, 20 meters away, his face ashen, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. The pulse rifle lay on the ground at his feet, forgotten. He had seen everything. The return to Outpost Xylos was a blur. Ben, in a state of profound shock, helped Elena gather her samples, his movements clumsy and automated. He barely spoke a word the entire way back, his eyes constantly darting towards her, as if seeing her for the first time or as if she were a ghost. The official story they concocted was thin. They claimed they had been cornered, and a lucky shot from Ben's rifle had scared the glycan off. It was a lie, but the alternative was simply unbelievable. The lie, however, did not hold. The outpost commander, a shrewd man named Kenji Tanaka, took one look at Ben's catatonic expression and Elena's bruised throat and knew there was more to the story. He debriefed them separately. Ben, under Tanaka's calm, persistent questioning, finally broke. He recounted what he had seen, his voice wavering, constantly repeating the phrase, "I don't know how, it's not possible." Tanaka listened, his face an impassive mask. He then replayed the footage from Ben's suit camera, which had been automatically recording. The distance and the poor lighting in the canyon made the image grainy, but it was undeniable. The blur of the pounce, Elena's impossible step forward, the sudden violent halt of the creature's motion, the tense, static tableau of the standoff and the Glycan's final, whimpering retreat. It was all there, a miracle or a nightmare captured in low-resolution video. The official report had to be filed. Tanaka knew he couldn't hide it. An encounter with a Glycan was a Category 1 incident. The footage, along with Ben's eyewitness testimony and Elena's terse, understated account, was encrypted and transmitted up the gravity well to Kethara Spire. Governor Thane Cromwell was reviewing logistics reports in his sterile, minimalist office, the stardusted black of space visible through his panoramic viewport, when the Priority 1 message arrived. He opened the file, his expression one of mild annoyance at the interruption. He read Tanaka's preamble. He read Ben Carter's rambling, almost hysterical statement. Then he played the video. He watched it once, his face impassive. He watched it a second time, leaning closer to the screen, his eyes narrowed. He watched it a third time, and a vein began to pulse in his temple. His reaction was not one of awe or wonder or even relief that his chief botanist was alive. It was a cold, pure, undiluted dread. He saw not a triumph of human will, but a catastrophic failure of protocol. He saw not a woman with a unique gift, but an unpredictable, unstable variable that he could not quantify or control. He saw a human being who, when faced with the ultimate expression of the planet's savagery, did not react with technology, with training, or with procedure. She reacted with something primal, something as wild and untamable as the beast she had faced. And that, to Thane Cromwell, was the most terrifying thing of all. His entire philosophy for governing Kethara Prime was built on a single, rigid principle: the absolute separation of the civilized and the savage. Humans were to be protected from the planet by a wall of technology and regulation. The planet was to be exploited for its resources from a safe, calculated distance. Dr. Vasquez had not just broken the rules. She had shattered that fundamental principle. She had blurred the line. She had invited the jungle in. He saw the potential consequences spiraling out before him. What if others tried to emulate her? What if this incident fostered a culture of recklessness among the scientists? The casualty rates would skyrocket. The project's insurance underwriters would drop them. The entire Kethara initiative, his career, would collapse. The risk was unacceptable. He muted the video, the image of Elena patting the head of the subdued monster frozen on his screen. His decision was instantaneous, cold, and absolute. Within the hour, the executive order flashed across every terminal at Outpost Xylos. It was concise and brutal. Executive Order 734 Alpha, effective immediately. In light of the extreme and unacceptable risks demonstrated by recent events, all groundside field expeditions on Kethara Prime are hereby suspended indefinitely. All personnel are restricted to the confines of Outpost Xylos until a full and comprehensive review of all safety protocols can be completed. The planet is deemed unsafe for human exploration at this time. There will be no exceptions. Acknowledgement required. KRMWELL, TCA. The message landed like a physical blow. A stunned silence fell over the outpost's common areas, labs, and workshops. The vibrant, dangerous world they had come so far to study was now, officially, off-limits. They were prisoners in their own sanctuary, sentenced by a man who had never even breathed the planet's air. Elena was in the medbay, getting her arm checked for microfractures, when the order came through. She read it on the nurse's terminal, her jaw tightening with each word. Her impossible, miraculous survival had not been seen as a victory. It had been used as the justification for a total lockdown. Her courage had been twisted into a crime. She walked out of the medbay and found Ben waiting for her in the corridor. He looked wretched, his face etched with guilt. "Elena, I had to tell them the truth," he stammered. "Tanaka, the camera footage." "It's not your fault, Ben," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "It's his." She looked past him, her gaze fixed on the reinforced viewport at the end of the hall, at the lush, green, forbidden world outside. "He's afraid, not of the Glycan. He's afraid of me. He's afraid of what I represent." "What do you represent?" Ben asked softly. "The unknown," she replied, her eyes reflecting the wild, untamed jungle. "The idea that our rules and our fences don't mean a thing out there, that there are other ways to survive, other languages to speak, and he can't control that, so he'll lock it in a cage." Her life's work, the culmination of her dreams, was just on the other side of that plasteel wall. The sun-eater orchid, with its potential to change the future, was blooming in a canyon she could no longer reach. She had faced down the deadliest predator on the planet, had stared into its soul and bent it to her will. But now she faced a new kind of predator, one that fought with memos and directives instead of claws and teeth. And she had no idea how to make a bureaucrat whimper and back down. The conflict had just begun, and the jungle in all its silent, waiting majesty was the prize.